What an honor to be here with such systems thinkers. So what is money today? It's beyond the memory of our civilization to be able to remember back to a time of barter, where we had to hunt and gather for our subsistence. And when you had to actually make use of your physical environment in order to make sure you either feasted or starved. In the news right now is the issue of the U.S. debt ceiling, and the President of the United States says there is no plan B in the event that they do not raise the debt ceiling. And if they don't, that there'd be catastrophic consequences, so much that we may even see a seizure of the commerce system in the U.S. and the entire globe. So we must ask ourselves the question, what do we do in the event of a systemic monetary collapse? What is our plan B in the face of such a nightmare scenario that but these are our leaders. Tell me there's no plan B. We're plan B. And to think through what community means with that question, we have to look at what would happen in the event that that did occur. Well, immediately, the dollar stores an immense amount of value. That value would not just go away. Barter would take its place. We have plenty of stuff. It's just a matter of how we move it around. And so at the community level, instead of doing business with a faceless business, you would make deals with members of your local community. Now, let's think through what would happen just in case we did have a blank slate and tomorrow our money system did go away. Well, you can't live off of your stored cache of red beans and rice forever. And violence certainly is a short-term plan for all. So we still have to work. And we would still have to make sure that we had critical infrastructure in place to have supplies and critical resources for services that need to have continuity. Now, thinking about this and putting it in context, let me tell you how I came to this situational thought back in 2005. I co-wrote the nation's first collapse response plan for the city of Portland. My background's in communications, software, economics, and farming. I grew up in a military family with a father and two brothers that served. My brother Chris was hand-selected by Tommy Franks as his crew chief, who's the former U.S. commander of U.S. Command in charge of operations for U.S. Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines. Now, Chris and his best friend, who is the crew chief for Air Force One, used to fly all over the world on these missions they couldn't discuss. And I thought, wow, that's cool. So dealing with catastrophe and dealing with trauma is something of the magnitude of a collapse of the U.S. system is something that we have to learn to deal with. And it was a shock of my life in 2005 when in March, Chris walked onto his front porch near Central Command in Florida and he killed himself. That sent me into a deep search for meaning. The meaning of why Chris used to have to fly around the world on all the missions in the Middle East that he had to. How 7 billion humans are expected to live on a planet with constrained resources and a paper money system backed up by nothing but faith. So what would we do? And so I left my job as the internet architect for a global media company, and we launched Bright Neighbor with the realization that this crisis can actually be a positive opportunity. A positive opportunity to take community at the hyper-local level and launch the sharing economy. And sharing economies are based on certain principles. Those certain principles take in mind everything that you do at the hyper-local level in order to have continuity of your supplies and your communications. So you would start with a communications platform, much like we've heard about here today. So you have your local organizers being able to tell you about opportunities and situational awareness, even at the block by block level. Trust. You need to be able to build up trust, especially if you don't know the people who live around you yet. It's this revolutionary act in America to knock on the door of your neighbors 5 houses down. So how do we build trust in a quick manner? Resource sharing, the ability to have stone soup. We have plenty of stuff. Again, it's a matter of moving it around and taking something that may have an idle aspect and using utility in a barter fashion. I actually have an alcohol fuel still listed in this because that's something I do in making my own fuel for a converted Honda engine. Transportation. Back before the crash of 2008 when we launched Bright Neighbor, we were one of the first ride-sharing systems out there, and now you're seeing it's more prevalent with apps that are coming online. As future fuel supplies become more costly and harder to access, this will become more prevalent in our lives as rolling up to the pump and filling our tanks. It's not going to be as easy as it used to be. A focus on local food systems so that we can make sure we have continuity of the food systems that are important to local neighborhoods. And then a knowledge system to be able to learn the skills that you need in order to reskill with the local sense of place. We found that a quick way to implement something of this nature is just like speed dating, right? So if you don't know your neighbors yet, you do speed neighboring. Go to a local place, a community center or a church, and you sit around a table, maybe 4 to a table, 10-minute sessions, and move it around. And so that way you don't just have to have that person where you see them all the time, but you don't know their name after several years. You can break right through that with speed neighboring. We innovated the first all-in-one local sustainability platform when we launched Bright Neighbor in 2007. It had a resource sharing aspect, so you can either make money or just do trades and barters with your resources. Anything from peer-to-peer car sharing, where here's a tool. How many books and DVDs have you lost to friends who you have no clue where they went to? You could fix all that. Places and events section so that you could say, who lives around me that has a similar interests to me that I can learn beekeeping from, and that has something maybe I can borrow or trade from them. All with the focus of building a context of community around resources, knowledge, and the people at that local level, but with a focus on making sure we have a continuity of supplies through creation. And I'll leave you with this. What your own plan B is, one context of the plan B that we have with Bright Neighbor, something I'm personally working on. Red wiggler worms make nature's most potent fertilizer. Doesn't require oil. You start with 2 worms and they double in population every 90 days. So, in a pinch, if we did have some kind of catastrophic financial crash, you could take porta potties and you could retrofit them at the neighborhood level, fill them with red wiggler worms, and save our drinking water at the same time as taking an input that is an energy for red wiggler worms, converting it into a fertilizer that can be brought out to farms. It takes 3 years for farms to switch from conventional farming to organic farming, and they could start with fuel crops. Sorghum gives you 10 times the amount of fuel as corn. So by the time that 3-year period is done, all the pathogens are out of the soil, and then you can switch back to food crops again. You can have farms where, why don't we put out of work the musicians to work? That could be the rock and roll farm. That could be the country music farm, the hip hop farm. Bus people out there and work together with those who are like-minded. But it will take work. Now, a 5-year plan, you start out with 2 worms, 90 days you have 4 worms. By the end of 5 years, theoretically, you'd have over 1 million worms. Think about it in terms of opportunity like this. Red wiggler worms go for an unbelievable $25 a pound. That's over king crab, a world delicacy, worms. 1,000 pounds of worms is over $25,000 in inventory and soil creation. You have 20% of America that takes place in just this cultural shift, and you'd have over $1.5 trillion in fertilizer makers alone, so that we can make food and fuel in a continuity in the face of what we're told that there is no plan B. This is America. We'll take any crisis and turn it into an opportunity because this is of the people, by the people, for the people, and we are Plan B, and I refuse to accept that from our leadership in this country. Bright Neighbor is a system that's deployed in all 95 neighborhoods in the city of Portland. We have it with our electric utility and across the state of Oregon with the National Guard on a volunteer basis. And we are here to help in the unlikely event that they don't raise that debt limit. But we do not have to accept that there is no Plan B. We are Plan B. Thank you very much.